The merciless African sun beat down relentlessly as wildlife photographer James Foster repositioned himself along the banks of the Sabi River in South Africa's Kruger National Park. 6 days into what was meant to be a 2-week assignment documenting predator interactions for National Geographic, and the conditions had become almost unbearable. Scorching temperatures, barely any rainfall, and wildlife growing increasingly desperate for water. This desperation had drawn an unusual convergence of animals to the river's dwindling pools, sparking volatile encounters between species that would typically maintain cautious distances. Perfect circumstances for his assignment, yet charged with such tension that James remained perpetually on edge behind his lens. "It shouldn't be much longer now," whispered Thabo Mona, the veteran park ranger who had been guiding James through the reserve. "That male has been watching the pool for nearly an hour. The lionesses will arrive soon." James nodded, fine-tuning his camera settings. Through his telephoto lens, he spotted the magnificent male lion Thabo had been tracking, a battle-scarred titan with a dark mane, known to the rangers as Tau. The lion lounged in the dappled shade beneath an acacia tree, roughly 50 yards from one of the few remaining water sources. He appeared half asleep, yet those amber eyes periodically swept the surroundings with predatory precision. "The pride has 2 pregnant females," Thabo continued, his voice barely audible despite their considerable distance. "They need water more frequently now. Tau always scouts the area first, ensures it's safe before they approach." As if on cue, 2 lionesses emerged from the tall grass downstream. Even from this distance, their rounded bellies were unmistakable, both heavily pregnant, moving with the careful deliberation of soon-to-be mothers. The first lioness, smaller in stature with a distinctive notch in her left ear, approached Tau and greeted him with a gentle headbutt before continuing toward the water. The second, notably larger and clearly further along in her pregnancy, followed several paces behind. James captured the sequence with practiced precision, his shutter clicking rapidly as the first lioness reached the water's edge and began drinking. Tau remained vigilant, his massive head raised, constantly scanning for potential threats. What happened next unfolded with such explosive suddenness that James nearly missed it entirely, despite looking directly through his viewfinder. The pool's surface erupted as a massive Nile crocodile, at least 15 feet long, lunged from the murky depths. Its powerful jaws clamped around the hindquarters of the second lioness the moment she reached the water's edge. The lioness roared in agony and surprise as the crocodile initiated its death roll, that signature maneuver designed to drag prey underwater and drown it swiftly. But the crocodile had miscalculated. The lioness, despite her pregnant condition, remained a formidable predator. She twisted with astonishing agility, her powerful claws raking across the reptile's armored hide as she fought desperately to break free. Tau's response was immediate and ferocious. The male lion launched from his position with a ground-shaking roar, covering the distance to the water's edge in seconds. The first lioness joined the assault, both cats now battling savagely to free their pride member from the crocodile's iron grip. "This is bad, very bad," Thabo muttered, raising his binoculars. "The female is bleeding heavily. Even if the crocodile doesn't kill her, those injuries might cause her to lose the cubs." James continued photographing the chaotic struggle, his professional detachment wavering as he witnessed the pregnant lioness's desperate fight. The crocodile maintained its hold despite the ferocious attacks from Tau and the other lioness, slowly dragging its victim deeper into the water where it would hold the advantage. What James did next would later be described as either incredibly brave or profoundly foolish, depending entirely on who was telling the story. Abandoning his camera, he grabbed the emergency wildlife rescue kit from their vehicle, a specialized tool set developed for rangers to assist animals caught in snares or other human-created hazards. "What are you doing?" Thabo demanded, alarm evident in his voice. "James, stop. Those are wild predators in a life-or-death situation." But James was already moving toward the struggle at the water's edge, adrenaline overriding his rational fear response. His years working with conservation teams had included emergency wildlife interventions, though nothing approaching this level of danger. "We can't just watch her die," he called back to Thabo. "Not when we might be able to help." As he approached, the situation at the water's edge grew clearer and more horrifying. The crocodile had dragged the lioness waist-deep into the water. Though Tao and the other lioness continued their assault, their effectiveness diminished as they were forced into the water where the crocodile dominated. The pregnant lioness's struggles were weakening, her roars diminishing to pained growls as blood clouded the water around her. James stopped at what he hoped was a marginally safe distance, quickly assembling the rescue kit's telescoping pole with its specialized hooked blade designed for cutting snares. It wasn't intended for this purpose, but it was the only tool available that might allow him to intervene without getting fatally close to the jaws of either predator. The lions were so focused on the crocodile that they hadn't yet registered James's approach. The crocodile, however, had noticed. Its ancient reptilian eyes shifted toward this new potential threat, momentarily loosening its grip on the lioness. That split second was all James needed. With precision born from years of fieldwork, he extended the pole and wedged the hooked blade between the crocodile's jaws and the lioness's hind leg. A sharp twist, leveraging the specialized tool against the crocodile's bite, and suddenly, the reptile's grip was compromised. The lioness, sensing her opportunity, gave one final, powerful wrench of her body. She broke free, scrambling toward the shore with a speed that belied her pregnant state and injuries. The crocodile, robbed of its prey and now facing a new threat, lashed its powerful tail and retreated into deeper water. In the sudden stillness that followed, James found himself standing at the river's edge, rescue tool still in hand, with three apex predators now turning their full attention toward him. Tao's amber eyes locked onto James with an intensity that froze him in place. The male lion's massive body tensed, blood from the fight still dripping from his muzzle. "Don't move," Tabo called from behind him, his voice tight with controlled fear. "Do not run. I'm coming to you." Slowly. James remained perfectly still, acutely aware that any sudden movement could trigger the lion's predatory instincts. The injured lioness had collapsed on the shoreline, her breathing labored, blood pooling beneath her torn hind leg. The other lioness stood protectively over her pridemate, her focus shifting between James and her injured companion. Tao took a step toward James. A low growl rumbled from his massive chest. Every survival instinct screamed at James to flee, but he knew that turning his back would almost certainly trigger a fatal chase response. Then something extraordinary happened. Something that would challenge fundamental assumptions about lion behavior and become the subject of scientific discussion for years to come. Tao stopped. The massive predator's posture subtly shifted, from aggressive to what almost appeared to be assessment. His growl subsided as he studied James with an intensity that seemed to transcend normal predator behavior. What happened in the next few moments would forever change James's understanding of these magnificent creatures and potentially rewrite scientific understanding of lion cognition and behavior. For several heartbeats that seemed to stretch into eternity, James remained perfectly still, locked in a silent standoff with Tao. The massive lion's amber eyes studied him with an intensity that felt almost like cognition, rather than mere predatory assessment. Behind him, James could hear Tabo's careful footsteps approaching, the ranger maintaining a deliberate, non-threatening pace. Sweat trickled down James's spine, a combination of the African heat and the adrenaline flooding his system. Then, with a low rumbling sound that was neither growl nor roar, Tao did something that defied conventional understanding of wild predator behavior. He turned away from James and moved toward the injured lioness, his body language shifting from potential aggression to what appeared to be concern. "Don't move yet," Taba whispered, now just a few feet behind James. "Let them settle." The injured lioness lay on the shoreline, her breathing labored, blood still seeping from the deep lacerations on her hind leg. Tao approached her carefully, sniffing her wounds before gently nuzzling her head. The other lioness maintained her protective stance, but her focus had shifted entirely from James to her injured pridemate. "We need to back away very slowly," Tabo instructed, his voice barely audible. "Eyes down. No sudden movements." With painstaking care, the two men began their retreat, moving with exquisite slowness toward their vehicle. James couldn't help glancing back at the extraordinary scene unfolding behind them. Tao had positioned himself protectively beside the injured lioness, occasionally looking toward James and Tabo, but making no move to pursue them. Once they reached the relative safety of their Land Rover, Tabo immediately radioed the park's wildlife veterinary unit. "We have an injured pregnant lioness at the eastern Sabi Bend," he reported. "Crocodile attack. Significant trauma to the hind leg. Heavy bleeding. It's the Nkosi Pride. Female is approximately 7 to 8 months into term." "Copy that," came the crackling response. "Dr. Mbeki is in the field about 20 minutes from your position. Stay on site and monitor, but maintain safe distance." James gathered his camera equipment, his hands still trembling slightly from the encounter. "Will she survive?" he asked, focusing his telephoto lens on the lions to continue documenting the situation from a safe distance. Tabo's expression was grim. "The injuries are severe. Even if the lioness survives, the trauma may cause her to lose the cubs. And if the leg is too damaged for proper healing." He didn't need to finish the thought. A predator that couldn't hunt was a predator that couldn't survive. "What was that?" James asked, still processing what had just occurred. "That behavior from Tao. I've never seen anything like it." Tabo shook his head, his own professional expertise challenged by what they had witnessed. "In 23 years as a ranger, I've never seen a lion, especially a dominant male, show restraint like that toward a human at such close range." "It was almost as if he understood I was trying to help," James finished. "Perhaps," Tabo acknowledged cautiously. "Or perhaps he was simply more concerned with the injured female than with us. Lions are intelligent animals, more complex than many people realize. But what you did was extremely dangerous, regardless of the outcome." James nodded, accepting the justified criticism. His intervention had violated every protocol for wildlife observation and endangered not only himself but Tabo as well. The fact that it had worked, that he had successfully helped free the lioness from the crocodile's grip, didn't negate the recklessness of his action. "I'm sorry for putting you at risk," he told Tabo sincerely. "I just couldn't stand by and watch her die like that." The ranger studied him for a moment before responding. "I understand the impulse. It's why many of us become rangers in the first place, to protect these animals. But we have to respect the boundaries between their world and ours." 20 minutes later, the wildlife veterinary unit arrived, a specialized team led by Dr. Nalam Mbeki, one of South Africa's foremost experts in big cat medicine. After a brief consultation with Tabo and James, during which James shared the footage he had captured of both the attack and the aftermath, Dr. Mbeki formulated an intervention plan. "The priority is stabilizing the lioness and assessing the viability of the pregnancy," she explained as her team prepared tranquilizer darts and medical equipment. "If we can control the bleeding and prevent infection, she has a chance. The cubs are another matter. The stress alone could trigger premature labor or miscarriage." Through his camera lens, James continued to document the scene as Dr. Mbecki's team implemented their plan. With practiced precision, they darted first Tao, then the uninjured lioness, and finally the wounded one. Within minutes, all 3 cats were sedated, allowing the medical team to approach safely. The examination of the injured lioness was both efficient and thorough. Dr. Mbeki cleaned and treated the deep lacerations, administered antibiotics and fluids, and used a portable ultrasound to check on the cubs. 3 cubs, she reported after a moment, her expression brightening. "Strong heartbeats. They appear unharmed so far." The news sent a wave of relief through James. Against the odds, not only had the lioness survived, but her unborn cubs had weathered the trauma as well. He continued photographing as Dr. Mbeki attached a tracking collar to the injured lioness, standard procedure for wildlife requiring ongoing monitoring, and concluded the emergency treatment. "She'll need follow-up care," Dr. Mbeki explained as her team packed up their equipment. "The collar will allow us to locate her for additional treatment and assessment. The next 48 hours will be critical." As the sedatives began to wear off, the veterinary team and observers retreated to a safe distance. Tao was the first to regain consciousness, rising unsteadily to his feet and shaking his massive head as if to clear the lingering effects of the tranquilizer. He immediately moved to check on the 2 lionesses, sniffing them thoroughly as they too began to stir. The injured lioness struggled to stand, her treated leg clearly still painful despite the medication. After several attempts, she managed to rise, leaning slightly against Tao for support in a gesture that seemed almost human in its intimacy. "They'll need to move to cover before nightfall," Tabo observed. "In their current state, they're vulnerable to other predators." As if understanding the urgency, Tao began to guide the pride away from the water's edge and toward a thicket of acacia trees that offered better protection. The injured lioness limped painfully but determinedly beside him, while the other female brought up the rear, constantly scanning for potential threats. Then, just before disappearing into the underbrush, Tao paused. The massive lion turned and looked directly at the humans observing from a distance, his amber eyes finding James with uncanny precision, despite the considerable distance between them. For a brief moment, something passed between man and predator, an acknowledgement that transcended the natural boundaries separating their worlds. Then, with a flick of his tail, Tao led his pride into the protective cover of the acacia thicket and out of sight. That evening, back at the research camp, James reviewed his footage with Dr. Mbeki and several other wildlife specialists who had heard about the extraordinary encounter and come to see the evidence for themselves. "The behavior you've documented is highly unusual," confirmed Dr. Esther Mangy, a behavioral ecologist specializing in large predator cognition. "Particularly the male's response to your intervention. Lions typically react to human proximity with either aggression or flight, depending on their prior experiences with humans and the specific context." "Could it be that Tao somehow recognized that James was helping?" asked one of the younger researchers. Dr. Mangy considered this carefully. Lions possess sophisticated social intelligence within their pride structures. They cooperate in hunting, raising cubs, and defending territory. But extending that social recognition to another species, particularly a potential threat like humans, that's not something we've documented conclusively until now. "Perhaps," James suggested, playing back the footage of Tao's intense gaze after the crocodile had retreated. The discussion continued late into the night, the scientists debating various interpretations of what the footage revealed. Was it simply that Tao prioritized the injured lioness over pursuing a human threat? Or was there something more profound at work, a level of cross-species recognition that challenged conventional understanding of predator cognition? James listened to the academic debate with interest, but his own thoughts kept returning to that moment of connection, the look in Tao's eyes that had seemed to convey something beyond mere animal assessment. Whatever the scientific explanation, he had experienced something profound at the water's edge, a moment of connection with one of nature's most formidable predators that had fundamentally shifted his understanding of the relationship between humans and wildlife. The next morning, with the rising sun painting the savanna in hues of gold and amber, James and Tabo set out to locate the Nkosi pride and document the injured lioness's condition. Dr. Mbeki had provided coordinates from the tracking collar, showing that the pride had moved approximately 2 miles from the river into a sheltered ravine that offered both protection and access to a small seasonal water source. "Remember, we observe only," Tabo emphasized as they approached the coordinates. "No interventions this time, regardless of circumstances." James nodded, accepting the justified restriction. Yesterday's events had been extraordinary, but they didn't change the fundamental protocols of wildlife observation and the importance of minimizing human impact on natural behaviors. What they discovered in the ravine, however, would once again challenge their expectations and add another layer to the already remarkable story unfolding before them. As they approached the ravine, James and Tabo maintained a cautious distance, using the natural terrain for cover. The morning light illuminated the landscape, casting long shadows across the savanna as they positioned themselves on a rocky outcropping that offered a clear view of the area below. Through his telephoto lens, James scanned the ravine until he located the lions. What he saw caused him to lower his camera momentarily in disbelief before quickly raising it again to document the extraordinary scene. The injured lioness lay in a patch of dappled shade, her treated leg extended awkwardly to minimize pressure on the wound. Beside her, maintaining a protective vigil, was Tao. But what made the scene remarkable was the male lion's behavior. He was actively grooming the injured female, his rough tongue carefully cleaning around her wounds with a gentleness that seemed at odds with his massive size and predatory nature. Have you ever seen anything like this? James whispered to Tabo, who was observing the scene through binoculars. Males will sometimes groom females, particularly during mating periods, Tabo replied quietly. But this level of attentiveness to an injured pride member, it's unusual. The second lioness was visible nearby, returning from what appeared to have been a successful hunt. She dragged a small antelope carcass toward the injured female, dropping it within easy reach before taking up a position that allowed her to monitor the surrounding area. They're caring for her, James realized, capturing the sequence with his camera. They understand she can't hunt, and they're providing for her. As they continued to observe, Dr. Mbeki arrived with a smaller team than the previous day, just herself and one assistant, maintaining a low-impact presence to minimize stress on the lions. The tracking data shows she remained in this location overnight, Dr. Mbeki reported quietly as she set up her equipment. That's a good sign. Movement would exacerbate the injuries and increase bleeding. Using a specialized long-range assessment scope, Dr. Mbeki conducted a visual examination of the injured lioness from their safe vantage point. The wound dressing is still in place, she noted with professional satisfaction. No visible signs of increased swelling or infection. Her respiration appears normal, and she's alert. These are all positive indicators. Throughout the assessment, Tao remained attentive to the injured female, occasionally raising his massive head to scan the surroundings. Several times his gaze seemed to fix directly on the humans observing from the ridge, though they were well camouflaged and maintaining a distance that should have made detection difficult. He knows we're here, James said softly. He's tracking our presence. Dr. Mbeki nodded in agreement. Lions have excellent sensory capabilities, scent, sound, movement. They detect things we often miss. The question is whether he perceives us as a threat. Based on Tao's relaxed posture and his continued focus on the injured lioness rather than the human observers, the answer appeared to be no. A remarkable shift from the typical wariness wild lions displayed toward human presence. For 3 days, James, Tabo, and the veterinary team maintained their observation schedule, documenting the pride's behavior and the injured lioness's recovery. What emerged was a fascinating picture of adaptation and care within the lion's social structure. The uninjured lioness took over primary hunting responsibilities, bringing smaller prey to the ravine where the injured female could feed without moving. Tao patrolled a perimeter around their temporary sanctuary, occasionally bringing water-rich vegetation to the injured lioness, behavior rarely documented in male lions, who typically contributed to the pride primarily through territory defense rather than direct care. On the 4th day, Dr. Mbeki determined that closer examination was necessary to ensure the wounds were healing properly and to check on the cub's development. This would require sedating the lions again, a procedure that carried its own risks, but was deemed necessary for the lioness's continued recovery. The timing is tricky, Dr. Mbeki explained as they prepared the intervention. We want to minimize stress, particularly given her pregnancy, but we can't risk infection setting in. The sedation process went more smoothly than anticipated. As if sensing the human's intentions, Tao and the uninjured lioness moved a short distance away when the veterinary team approached, remaining visible but not interfering as Dr. Mbeki darted the injured female. This is unprecedented, Taba whispered as they watched Tao observing the procedure from approximately 50 yards away. His body language is alert but not aggressive. It's almost as if he's allowing the intervention. The examination confirmed what they had hoped. The wounds were healing well with no signs of infection, and the cubs appeared to be developing normally despite the trauma. Dr. Mbeki applied fresh medications, took blood samples for comprehensive analysis, and adjusted the tracking collar before withdrawing to allow the lioness to recover from sedation. What happened next would become one of the most remarkable documented interactions between wild lions and humans in scientific literature. As the veterinary team packed their equipment and prepared to leave, Tao approached. Not in the characteristic stalk of a predator, but with a deliberate, measured gait that conveyed neither aggression nor fear. The team froze, following protocol for unexpected predator approach. 20 yards. 15. 10. Tao continued his approach until he stood just 5 yards from the humans, close enough for them to see the individual whiskers on his massive face, the amber flecks in his eyes, the scars of past battles etched into his powerful features. For several breathless moments, no one moved. Then, with deliberate slowness, Tao lowered his massive head in what could only be described as a gesture of acknowledgement. He held the position briefly before turning and walking back to the injured lioness, who was beginning to stir from sedation. "Did that just happen?" Dr. Becky's assistant whispered, voicing the stunned disbelief they all felt. "It happened," James confirmed, his camera having captured every moment of the extraordinary interaction. "The question is, what does it mean?" That question would spark discussions among wildlife behaviorists, conservation biologists, and animal cognition specialists for years to come. The footage James captured, first of his intervention at the river, then of the pride's coordinated care of the injured female, and finally of Tao's deliberate approach and apparent acknowledgement, challenged fundamental assumptions about lion behavior and cross-species recognition. 2 weeks after the initial incident, the injured lioness was showing remarkable recovery. She had begun moving around the ravine, her gait still awkward but improving daily as the wounds healed. The tracking data showed regular movement patterns that indicated normal behavior resuming, and visual assessments confirmed her pregnancy was progressing without complications. James's assignment with National Geographic evolved from a standard documentation of predator interactions to an in-depth exploration of this specific pride and the extraordinary behaviors they had displayed. The working title, "The Lion's Acknowledgement," captured the central mystery of the encounter. Had Tao recognized and acknowledged human intervention on behalf of his pride member? Scientific opinions remained divided. Some researchers suggested that the behaviors observed, while unusual, could be explained through established understanding of lion social structures and territorial awareness. Others proposed that the encounter revealed previously unrecognized cognitive capabilities in lions, specifically, the ability to distinguish between threatening and helpful human behaviors in complex contexts. Dr. Mangy, who had joined the observation team after reviewing James's initial footage, offered perhaps the most balanced assessment. "What we're witnessing may be a combination of factors," she explained during an impromptu seminar at the research camp. "The pride's established social bonds, Tao's individual temperament, the specific context of the intervention, and perhaps previous neutral or positive experiences with humans in this protected area. Together, these may have created the conditions for this highly unusual behavior." "So you don't think it was conscious recognition?" James asked, still convinced that what he had experienced with Tao went beyond coincidental behavior patterns. "I'm saying that consciousness and recognition are complex concepts, even when studying human cognition," Dr. Mangy replied thoughtfully. "With non-human animals, we must be careful not to project our own cognitive frameworks onto their behavior. But what I can say with certainty is that your documentation has opened new questions about lion cognition that deserve serious scientific investigation." As James's assignment drew to a close, he made one final visit to observe the Nkosi pride. In the month since the crocodile attack, they had moved from the ravine to a more expansive territory that still allowed access to water but provided better hunting grounds. The tracking collar showed the injured lioness, now largely recovered, was moving normally with the pride. From a carefully selected observation point, James watched as the pride moved through the golden grass of late afternoon. The injured lioness, her pregnancy now in its final stages, walked with only a slight limp, flanked protectively by both Tao and the other female. They moved with the synchronized awareness of a family unit that had weathered crisis together and emerged stronger. As the lions paused in a small clearing, Tao suddenly raised his head, his nose testing the air currents. With unerring accuracy, he turned and looked directly at the camouflage blind where James observed from nearly 100 yards away. For a brief moment, their eyes met across the distance, predator and human, connected by an encounter that had challenged the perceived boundaries between their worlds. Then, with a flick of his tail, Tao turned and continued leading his pride toward the horizon, disappearing into the gathering dusk of the African savanna. 2 months later, James received a message from Tabo that brought the extraordinary story full circle. The formerly injured lioness had successfully given birth to 3 healthy cubs. The Kruger Park Rangers had named them after the 3 people present at the river that day, Nala, Tabo, and James. The photographs James captured of the tiny cubs, protected by their powerful father and healthy mother, became the final images in his National Geographic feature. But it was the closing paragraph of his article that resonated most deeply with readers around the world. In a moment of crisis on the banks of the Sabi River, the boundaries between human and lion, predator and photographer, temporarily dissolved. What remained was not a simple narrative of rescue or intervention, but something more profound, a recognition, perhaps, that on this planet we share, the well-being of one species is inextricably linked to the well-being of all. Whether Tao consciously acknowledged human help or simply responded to the specific context of that day may remain scientifically unresolved. But in that moment when his amber eyes met mine across the savannah, I felt something that transcended scientific explanation, a connection between species that challenges our understanding of the wild world and our place within it. The article, published alongside James's extraordinary photographs, would go on to win multiple awards and inspire a new generation of wildlife conservationists. More importantly, it would contribute to expanded protections for the Kruger ecosystem and its magnificent predators, ensuring that Tao's pride and countless others would continue to roam the savannah for generations to come. And occasionally, when new visitors to that section of Kruger reported unusually calm behavior from a certain dark-maned lion, the rangers would smile knowingly and share the now legendary story of the man who helped a pregnant lioness escape a crocodile's jaws, and the surprising reaction that changed our understanding of these magnificent predators forever.